Mom, you need to stop pretending you can still handle your own money. Daniel said it so quietly that, for a second, I wondered if I had imagined the cruelty in it. We were sitting at my kitchen table in the house where I had raised him, a red brick colonial outside Columbus, Ohio, the same table where I had helped him with multiplication homework and signed his college applications. Now, at 73, I was watching my own son look at me as if I were a problem that needed managing. Melissa sat beside him with one hand resting on a glossy brochure for Brookside Senior Living, 15 miles away. "Nobody's taking anything from you, Evelyn," she said. "We're trying to protect you." Protect me. That was the word they kept using. Daniel slid 2 sheets of paper across the table. A missed property tax notice, and a record of a $24,800 transfer from the investment account Arthur had left me to a consulting company called Harrow Financial Services. My name appeared on the authorization. I stared at it longer than I should have. I didn't approve this. Daniel's expression softened in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Mom, you told me you did." I looked at him. "When?" Melissa answered instead. "About 3 weeks ago. You called us afterward." You sounded confused. I remembered 3 weeks ago. Tuesday. Rain all morning. I had driven 4 miles to Kroger, bought coffee, chicken breasts, and Arthur's favorite cinnamon cookies, even though he had been gone nearly a year. I remembered the cashier telling me my coupon had expired. I remembered coming home at 2:17 because the grandfather clock had chimed just as I walked inside. But I did not remember calling Daniel. I did not remember Harrow Financial Services. And I certainly did not remember approving $24,800. That uncertainty frightened me more than their accusations. Daniel reached for my hand. I moved mine before he touched it. "Dad handled the complicated things," he said. "Maybe it's time you let me do that now." 40 years of marriage seemed to disappear inside one sentence. Arthur had earned the larger paycheck, yes, but I had stretched every dollar when Daniel was young. I had tracked the mortgage, insurance, groceries, repairs, tuition, and eventually our investments. Arthur used to joke that I could find a missing $20 bill in a hurricane. Yet I said nothing. They left just before sunset. Melissa forgot the Brookside brochure on the table. Or maybe she wanted me to find it there. At 10:36 that night, I walked into Arthur's study. The room still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. His steel safe sat behind the bottom shelf of the bookcase. I had not opened it since his funeral. The combination was our wedding date. I turned the dial. 22, 11, 78. The lock clicked before I finished the final number. I stopped. I knew I had not made a mistake. The safe had opened 1 digit early. Inside were tax folders, property records, Arthur's watch, and a cream-colored envelope I had never seen before. My name was written across the front in Arthur's handwriting. Underneath it were 6 words that made the room feel suddenly colder. "If Daniel says you're forgetting things." I stood there listening to the old house settle around me. Then something tapped once from inside the safe, although nothing inside it was moving. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single card in Arthur's handwriting. "Don't sign anything. Check the dates first." Beneath the envelope was a notarized document. The date stopped me. 5 months after Arthur died. It authorized Daniel Whitmore to control several of my financial accounts if I became mentally incapable. And at the bottom, in blue ink, was my signature. Perfect. Familiar. Mine. Except I had never signed it. I touched the signature with one finger, expecting the ink to feel different somehow, as if a lie should leave a texture behind. It didn't. My name curved across the page exactly the way I had written it for decades. Even the little upward stroke on the W was there. Beneath it sat the seal of a notary named Patricia Sloan. I read the date again. 5 months after Arthur's funeral. That was impossible enough, but something else bothered me more. The paper smelled faintly of his cedar aftershave. Arthur had kept one bottle in the desk drawer for years, long after they stopped making that particular scent. I told myself the document had simply absorbed the smell from the safe. Then the desk lamp blinked twice. Arthur used to tap that lamp when he wanted my attention while I balanced bills beside him. I stood perfectly still. Arthur. Saying his name aloud made me feel foolish, but the room seemed to tighten around me. Nothing answered. The next morning, I did something Daniel would have called unnecessary. I began proving my own memory to myself. I pulled 6 months of bank statements, receipts, grocery orders, utility confirmations, and my paper calendar from the kitchen drawer. The property tax notice Daniel had shown me was the easiest. Franklin County's payment portal showed my taxes had been paid on time, down to the exact amount, for $1,286.17. I had even printed the confirmation. So why had Daniel brought me a delinquency notice? The larger mystery was the investment account. One transfer for $24,800 had gone out on a Wednesday night at 11:43 p.m. The authorization came through my email address. I stared at the timestamp until my eyes hurt. I had been asleep by 10 that night. I knew because I had written "storm, power flickered" on my calendar before bed. I called Dr. Rachel Monroe, my physician of 14 years, and asked for an appointment without telling Daniel. 2 days later, I sat across from her while she gave me a series of memory and reasoning tests. Names, shapes, dates, numbers backward. When we finished, she removed her glasses and said, "Evelyn, nothing here suggests you can't manage your own affairs." Relief came first, then anger. Then why does my son think I can't? Rachel hesitated. She turned her monitor toward me. In my chart was a note entered almost 4 months earlier. Family reports escalating confusion involving finances, missed obligations, and repeated questions. I had never reported any of that. Rachel had never observed it. Someone else had been building the story before Daniel ever sat at my kitchen table. That afternoon, I called attorney Nathan Caldwell, a 58-year-old elder law specialist my neighbor had once recommended. I showed him the notarized paper. He studied the signature, then the seal. "Patricia Sloan," he said slowly. "I know that name." He typed for less than a minute, then turned his laptop toward me. Patricia worked at a small legal office in Dublin, Ohio. Nathan pulled up a publicly filed affidavit from a county property dispute the previous summer. Melissa Whitmore's signature was on it, and Patricia Sloan's notary seal sat beneath it. Then he found a second filing 6 weeks later carrying both names again. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Mom, Melissa says you've been asking questions. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Then my phone lit up with an alert from the smart home app Arthur had installed years earlier, study lamp on. I knew I had switched it off before leaving. Before I could open the camera feed, a new email notification appeared at the top of Nathan's screen. The sender field read Arthur Whitmore. Nathan and I stared at the screen as if moving too quickly might make the message disappear. The sender was Arthur Whitmore. My Arthur. The subject line contained only 4 words. "You found it, Evelyn." Nathan clicked the email. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a short sentence telling me to look behind the framed photograph in Arthur's study and to trust dates before memories. The message showed it had been sent less than 30 seconds earlier. Nathan checked the routing information twice. "This could have been scheduled," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Arthur had been gone nearly a year. I wanted a logical answer. I needed one. When I returned home that evening, the framed photograph was exactly where it had hung for almost 2 decades. It was our 25th anniversary picture, taken beside Lake Erie. I lifted it from the wall myself. Behind it was a small brass key and a folded card with a handwritten number, 317. The next morning, I drove to First Franklin Bank in Dublin. Box 317 had belonged to Arthur alone, but the bank held a signed authorization naming me to receive access after his death. After they verified my identification and the death certificate already on file, an employee opened it with me. Inside were copies of account statements, medical correspondence, and a folder labeled Brookside. Beneath that folder was a small sealed card in Arthur's handwriting. I slipped it into my purse without opening it. My hands went cold before I opened it. The first page was an inquiry form for Brookside Senior Living. Requested move-in month, October. Preferred apartment, 1 bedroom. Financial contact, Daniel Whitmore. Family coordinator, Melissa Whitmore. I had never toured Brookside. I had never agreed to leave my home. Yet someone had already listed my medications, insurance information, emergency contacts, and even the dimensions of my bedroom furniture. Then I saw a note in the margin written in Melissa's neat handwriting. "Sell house after transition." I called Nathan immediately. He told me not to confront anyone yet. "They may be expecting you to react emotionally," he said. "We need to know how far this goes." That afternoon, Daniel called and invited me to tour Brookside, just so I could see it wasn't frightening. I agreed. I hated myself for sounding grateful. The facility sat behind rows of maple trees, 14 miles from my house. All polished floors, and smiling photographs. An administrator named Karen Wallace shook my hand warmly. Then she looked at Daniel and said, "I'm glad we kept the October transition date flexible." Daniel's face changed, only for a second, but I saw it. "There must be some mistake," I said. Karen glanced between us. "Your family submitted preliminary placement information in June. For months before Daniel claimed, he first became worried about my memory. On the drive home, Melissa kept talking about safety rails and meal plans. I watched houses pass outside the window and said almost nothing. That night, I searched the folder Melissa had left in my kitchen desk weeks earlier. Under insurance forms and copies of my driver's license, I found a printed email approving the $24,800 transfer. It had been sent from my account at 11:43 p.m. I turned the page over. On the back was a network log Nathan had never seen. It listed an IP address I did not recognize. I checked it against the router information for my own house. It was not mine. As I reached for my phone, the sealed card from box 317 slipped from my purse onto the table. I opened it. In Arthur's handwriting were 5 words that made my chest tighten. "Daniel knows the safe combination." I read Arthur's 5 words until they blurred. "Daniel knows the safe combination." For the first time, I stopped thinking of my son as someone being manipulated and started wondering how long he had been lying to me. Nathan came over the next morning with a forensic accountant named Rebecca Sloan, no relation to Patricia. Rebecca examined the transfer logs, the notarized authorization, and the records from Brookside. She compared the unfamiliar IP address with metadata from messages Daniel had sent me from home and confirmed the same residential connection had been used when the $24,800 transfer was approved. Then she found something worse. The document carrying my signature had also been scanned through that connection. "This doesn't prove who sat at the computer," she warned, "but it proves your house wasn't involved." I felt something inside me harden. That afternoon, Daniel came by alone. I left the chain on the door. "Did you know the combination to Dad's safe?" I asked. He went completely still. "Mom, where did you hear that? Answer me." He looked toward the driveway before lowering his voice. "Dad gave it to me 2 years ago. He asked me to retrieve some tax records when he was sick." There it was. An admission. I expected relief because suspicion had finally become certainty. Instead, I felt sick. Daniel stepped closer. "Melissa told me you signed the authorization willingly. She said you were embarrassed about forgetting things." He looked toward Arthur's study. "She gave me the original and told me you wanted it kept somewhere secure. I put it in Dad's safe myself. I thought that was what you wanted." For one terrible second, the future-dated document beneath Arthur's envelope finally made sense. And Brookside, his eyes dropped. I knew about the tour. The October move. Silence. That hurt more than an excuse would have. Before I could speak again, the lights in the hallway blinked twice. Daniel looked past me toward Arthur's study. "That's been happening to you too?" I stared at him. "What do you mean, too?" He swallowed. "Dad scheduled emails before he died." The words stripped the mystery out of the room so quickly I almost laughed. Daniel explained that Arthur had once shown him a digital service that could send delayed messages if certain files were opened or passwords triggered. "He called it insurance," Daniel said. I thought he was joking. The email from Arthur was not a ghost reaching through Nathan's laptop. It had been waiting, watching for something. Yet Daniel looked frightened when I told him about the lamp and the safe opening 1 digit early. "Those weren't part of it," he said. After he left, I went straight to Arthur's study. I removed every folder from the safe, then ran my fingers along the steel walls. Behind the back panel, one corner shifted. I pulled. A narrow compartment opened, revealing a black flash drive taped inside. My name was written on it. I inserted it into Arthur's old computer. One video file appeared, dated 3 weeks before his death. Arthur filled the screen, thinner than I remembered, but alert. He looked directly into the camera. "Evelyn, if you're watching this, they've already made Daniel look guilty." I stopped breathing. Arthur leaned closer. "Listen carefully. Daniel is weak. He may even help her, but he is not the person I'm afraid of." Then he held up a photograph of Melissa standing outside Patricia Sloan's office. Beside her was a man I had never seen before. Arthur lowered the photograph and held up a small black external drive. "Melissa brought this into my study once when she thought I was asleep. She keeps copies because she trusts no one. Daniel doesn't know it exists." Then he raised the photograph again. "That man helped her build the plan. If you ever find the black drive, Don't open anything until someone you trust is beside you. The screen went black. The man in the photograph was named Curtis Hale. Nathan identified him before breakfast. He was a private financial consultant who had spent 15 years helping families reorganize estates before guardianship petitions. More important, he had worked with Patricia Sloan on 3 previous incapacity cases. My stomach turned cold. By 9 that morning, Nathan, Rebecca, and I were sitting around my dining room table with a still image from Arthur's video on Nathan's tablet. Every piece was suddenly moving at once. Curtis had met Melissa 4 times before Daniel ever told me I was forgetting things. Patricia had notarized the document carrying my copied signature. The $24,800 transfer had gone to Harrow Financial Services, a company Rebecca discovered was registered to a business address used by Curtis. Brookside had received my personal information through an email account created in Melissa's name. This had not started with Daniel's concern. It had started with a plan. Nathan called Harold Bennett, Arthur's longtime estate attorney. Harold arrived 30 minutes later carrying a sealed file Arthur had instructed him not to open unless someone challenged my mental capacity. My hands went numb when Harold broke the seal. Arthur had known. Not everything, but enough. Months before he died from complications of heart disease, Arthur had amended our family trust. The language was precise. If any beneficiary tried to gain control of my assets through family-supplied claims of incapacity, authority over the trust would freeze until 2 independent physicians examined me. Daniel could not take control simply because Melissa produced paperwork. Curtis could not move the money. Patricia could not make a signature become consent. Arthur had built a wall around me before I even knew I needed one. Then Harold turned to Daniel's name. "There's another condition," he said. "Any successor trustee who knowingly participated in misrepresenting my capacity could be removed permanently." My son stood to lose control of everything he believed he would someday manage. The doorbell rang. Daniel was outside. Alone. Pale. He came in carrying a small external drive. "Melissa lied to me," he said. "About your signature. About the doctor. About Harrow." I wanted to believe him. I hated that part of myself. "You still agreed to Brookside." His face tightened. "I thought you had agreed too. You never asked me." He had no answer. Then he placed the drive on the table. He said he had found it hidden inside Melissa's home office cabinet after hearing my question about Curtis. Rebecca carried it into Arthur's study and connected it to his old computer, the same machine that had played his recording. Folder after folder appeared. Draft petitions. My bank statements. Brookside emails. Copies of Dr. Monroe's notes. A scanned image of my signature taken from a Christmas charity check I had written 2 years earlier. And a document titled Transition Timeline. October, Brookside move. November, Financial Authority. January, Property Consultation. Daniel stared at the screen like he had never seen his own wife before. Then the lamp over the dining table blinked twice. The television in Arthur's study turned on by itself. His paused video resumed. None of us had touched the remote. Arthur's face filled the screen. "If the black drive has reached this house," he said, "then you're ready for the last file." Rebecca looked down at the drive. It was the same one Arthur had held up in his recording. A folder we had not opened, yet was flashing at the bottom of the screen. Its name was simple. After Evelyn signs. Rebecca opened the folder. Inside was the part Melissa had never intended Daniel to see. After Evelyn signs. Move primary investment authority to Curtis Hale. List the Columbus house for sale within 90 days. Remove Daniel as financial contact once the assets were consolidated. Melissa had not been building a future for Daniel. She had been using him as the respectable son who could stand in court and say his mother was confused. Curtis would control the money. Patricia would validate the paperwork. Melissa would control Daniel. And I would be living 14 miles away at Brookside while strangers walked through my home. Daniel sat down hard. "She told me this was about protecting what Dad left us." "No," I said. "You told yourself that because it was easier than asking me what I wanted." Harold found one more file on the drive. Melissa's notes showed that my signature had been copied from the Christmas charity check, then placed onto the authorization before Patricia notarized it. The $24,800 transfer to Harrow had been designed to look like one of my mistakes. Dr. Monroe's medical record had been fed exaggerated family reports so the financial irregularities would appear believable. By the end of that week, Nathan had everything needed to stop the incapacity petition before it reached a hearing. Dr. Monroe submitted her independent evaluation. Harold invoked Arthur's trust provision. Rebecca preserved the digital records. Brookside removed my reservation. The authorization bearing my forged signature was rejected. Daniel was removed as successor trustee by my choice. I appointed an independent fiduciary instead. Melissa's plan collapsed because Arthur had prepared for the possibility that someone might try to make me doubt myself. But one mystery still remained. The lights. The television. The safe. Harold smiled sadly when I asked him. Arthur had planned those touches during his final months. Harold said he had linked several lights in the house to simple triggers: a delayed message arriving, a marked file opening, a device he recognized returning to Arthur's computer. That was why the study lamp, the hallway lights, and even the dining room lamp had seemed to answer at impossible moments. He had also saved the black drive's device signature after seeing Melissa use it in his study. If that same drive was ever plugged into Arthur's old computer again, a small program he left behind would wake the television and resume the next recording he had prepared. The safe was simpler. A locksmith named Wesley Grant had adjusted a secondary latch so it would release one digit before our old combination. The little tap I heard that first night was the latch settling into place. He wanted you to feel his hand on your shoulder, Harold said. Just long enough to keep you looking. Months later, Daniel came to the house alone. He asked if I could ever forgive him. I told him forgiveness was not the same as giving back the keys. He cried quietly. I did not. Not then. On Arthur's birthday, with the temperature outside at 36 degrees, I went into his study and opened the safe one last time. Beneath the legal papers sat an old household ledger from 1987. Arthur's paycheck was written on the left. On the right was my handwriting. Mortgage, groceries, gas, Daniel's school shoes, $40 into savings. Daniel had said his father handled everything important. Arthur had spent his final months proving otherwise. I closed the ledger, turned off the lamp, and waited. For once, it stayed dark. I smiled because I finally understood what Arthur had meant those strange moments to do. He had not left me a ghost story. He had left me a trail back to the woman it was before my own family taught me to question her.